All right. So at this point, the deadline for Lab 1 has not completed, but by the time you're watching this, it probably already has, and you've probably already thought quite a bit about the differences between management and leadership. Management is defined by your textbook as the process of achieving objectives using a set of resources. It always goes back to resources. A manager is a member of an organization that has been given the task of marshaling and administering their resources, coordinating a set of tasks, the completions of those tasks, and handle the many roles necessary to complete those tasks and achieve desired objectives. There are typically three roles that a manager will fill. An informational one, wherein they collect, process, and use information that will affect the completion of their objectives. An interpersonal one, in which they interact with their superiors, subordinates, outside stakeholders, and then any other parties that can influence or are influenced by the tasks that they have assigned to them. And the decisional role, where they select from a group of alternative approaches and resolve conflicts, dilemmas, and various challenges that arise while trying to complete their tasks. So I've looked at each of the videos uploaded thus far. So far, most of you have come to relatively similar conclusions to the ones seen in the book. Mainly that a manager is an organizational role and a leader is more of an interpersonal one. According to your textbook, a leader influences employees so that they are willing to accomplish their objectives. They lead by example. They become invested in their employees' lives. In some way, they inspire them to do their job. He or she is expected to lead by example and demonstrate personal traits that instill a desire in others to follow. In other words, they provide purpose, direction, motivation for those beneath them to follow. In comparison, a manager is a much more business-oriented kind of person. A manager administers resources of an organization. They create budgets, authorize expenditures, and hire employees, and make sure that their employees get their jobs done. Effective managers can be effective leaders, and I would argue that in order to be an effective manager, it is much easier to be an effective manager when you are an effective leader. There are three basic kinds of leaders: autocrat leaders who say, my way is the highway, democratic ones who seek influence from their subordinates, and laissez faire ones, which basically say, we need to get this set of tasks done, get to work. They let employees basically do their jobs without having too much oversight into what they actually do. Your book goes into a bit more detail as to the strengths and weaknesses of them, but to generalize them, autocrats are very fast, but oftentimes they lead to a single point of failure in which if the manager or leader is incorrect, then everyone's going to be incorrect. Democratic ones can help ease that disadvantage a bit, but gathering all those opinions and thoughts does take significant amount of time. And laissez-faire leaders really need to understand how competent their underlings are. If their subordinates are very confident, they're able to get the job done, then laissez-faire will typically work out if they're given enough direction. But if they're not, then this type of leadership style can lead to disaster. There are two basic approaches to management. Traditional management theory calls the principles planning, organizing, staffing, directing, and controlling, POS to C. Popular management theory categorizes the principles into planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. These basically mean the same things for the purposes of this course. If you're going more into management theory, there are some discrepancies between the two, but for the purposes of this, we'll only be talking about popular management theory. Popular management theory uses this cycle called the planning controlling link. You start with planning, move to organizing, move to leading, then to controlling, and you're back up to the top. Planning is the process of developing, creating, and implementing your strategies so that you can achieve what it is you want to achieve, your objectives. Strategic planning usually occurs at the corporate level of an organization for a period of time, usually 5 or more years. Basically, strategic planning is saying, where do we as an organization want to be a few years down the line? Tactical planning is more focused on production planning and integrating organizational resources below the entire enterprise. So usually it'll take place in a single department or a section of the organization. Usually this one lasts for 1 to 5 years, and tactical plans usually have the end goal of advancing some part of the strategic plan. A set of tactical plans chained together will accomplish the objectives of your strategic plan if planned correctly. Finally, at the smallest level are operational plans, day-to-day operations of local resources occurring in the present or the short term. Basically, what are we going to do today, this week, this month, that kind of thing. Operational planning is to tactical planning, much like tactical planning is to strategic planning. Operational plans build up together to accomplish the goals of tactical planning, as tactical plans accomplish the goals that build up to your strategic plan. So this is the process of control. You'll start with comparing actual performance with the standard. You somehow measure how well you're accomplishing your goals against how well you expected to perform your goals. If your standard is being obtained, great, continue going. If it's not, then you ask yourself, well, are we varying significantly enough to be concerned about it? If your variance is acceptable, then just keep doing what you're doing. If not, you have to ask yourself, well, are we being reasonable with our standards? Is it reasonable to assume that we can achieve that level of quality? If it is accessible, then we need to figure out what the cause of variation actually is and correct it. If not, then we need to revise our standards. And this all leads back up to, once again, measuring actual performance and figuring out what your standards are so you can compare them and begin the process all over again. Governance is the set of responsibilities and practices that the board and executive management exercise with the goal of providing some strategic direction and ensuring that your objectives are achieved while ascertaining that risks are managed appropriately and verifying that your resources are being used responsibly. Basically, governance is the ways in which the board and executive management direct the organization. It's the stuff that comes from the CEO or your CPO or whoever is actually in charge of you. It emphasizes escalating the importance of InfoSec to the very top of the organization. InfoSec is not going to succeed if it's not being supported by everyone in the organization. A single weak link can cause serious problems. And if your top executives are not supporting your InfoSec decisions, then really most of the company is not going to take it seriously, or at least that's what the data shows. Finally, for this lecture, I'll introduce the steps that your book presents for solving problems in an organization. Step 1 is to recognize and define the problem. You can't solve a problem that you don't understand. So you need to figure out that a problem's there and figure out what that problem actually is. Step 2 is to gather facts and make assumptions. Now that you know what the problem is, you need to figure out all of the variables involved with the problem. Say the problem is that you have a lack of, that you're not meeting your standards. You have some performance issues with some of your employees. Well, first you gather some facts about them and try and see, well, what is their productivity? What is our standard? Gather the things that you can know and then make assumptions about the things that you don't know. Once you've identified those facts and made your assumptions, you can start developing possible solutions. Well, maybe we can hire a new person. Maybe we can retrain this person. Maybe we can have someone sit down and talk to them. Or maybe we're blowing this whole thing out of proportion and we can just do nothing. Once you've developed all of your possible solutions, you'll analyze and compare them. You'll figure out, is this cost effective? Is this going to work? Is it going to do what we want it to do? Are we making the right decision here? And finally, once you've figured all those out, you select your solution, you implement it, and then you check and see if it worked right. If it didn't work right, then you're back to the drawing board. You'll usually go back to gathering facts, but maybe if you had a poor understanding of the problem, it would work well to go back and redefine it. So that is the lecture on what is management. In the next and final lecture for Chapter 1, we'll talk about some of the principles of information security management. Thank you.